Hey, get inspired, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to yet another episode of Life Inspired. This is a program where people are talking about how and why they're following Jesus. And we're so glad that you would tune in and that you would share this story with anybody that you think needs to hear it. You can tune in or share from lifeinspiredshow.com. I always have to recall that. Lifeinspiredshow.com, our YouTube channel, or our Facebook page. And we do ask that you would subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page, because that just helps more people hear about Jesus' love and how important they are to him. And so we have a wonderful guest today that I just got to meet this morning for the first time. We've met by phone before. This is Theresa Cruthird, Dr. Theresa Cruthird. So thank you for being our guest today, Theresa.
Well, thank you so much for asking me to join you today. It's an honor. Appreciate it.
I'm so glad that you would share your story. I know that you're not like a fan of being all public, but you were willing to share because Jesus is so awesome. So Typically we talk about a turning point. We typically say life was going along. There was some kind of a ... moment in your life where, and then God stepped in and he turned you to a new walk. And now you're walking this inspired life. And what does that look like? So the three questions I typically ask are, what was the thing before the turning point? Tell us what life was like before God stepped in.
Okay. So one of the quotes that I think mimics my pre-Christ journey is a quote that you see on these signs that, you know, sometimes they're not very good quotes, but this one said mistakes, like in really big letters. And after that, it was colon, like, you know, it could be that the purpose of your life is simply to serve as a warning to other people. So I thought, you know, the early part of my life was kind of riddled with like bad decisions. And so at some point, you know, I even thought maybe my life is really just a warning, like for the things that when you're a strong-willed person and you're not really attuned to walking with the Lord, you just do things, you know. And so I got saved. My hairdresser actually led me to the Lord and on my couch, like your couch, when I was 16 years old.
Wow.
And so I accepted the Lord and I started reading the Bible and just kind of learning the word, but never really understood what walking with God was. It was just kind of an understanding God, you know, God exists. You know, this is his word. You kind of don't do certain things and you do other things. And that was when I was 16. And when I left home for the first time, I went to college. I should say when I was in high school, I was kind of a mediocre student. I wanted to be a doctor, always wanted to be a doctor because, you know, my mom was sick a lot when I was younger. And I just remember on one occasion, you know, there was a lot of blood in her room and I was really scared. I was probably 6 years old and she went to the hospital and she came out and she was better. And so I even started to, and that was a frequent occurrence, and I started to appreciate the atmosphere of the hospital. Like I really liked it because it was a place where healing took place and people got better. So I wanted to be a doctor from like my earliest memory. And I thought, okay, well, this is going to be easy. You know, I just do what you're supposed to do to become a doctor. And so I was kind of strong-willed, I guess, and a little unmotivated, let's say, unmotivated. I'm not supposed to use the word lazy. Unmotivated. And so by the grace of God, I got into a good school. And even once I was in college, I wasn't a good listener. So I had advisors that said, hey, don't take this class first, take that. And I just totally didn't listen. So my first semester in college, I got a D in chemistry, which is like one of the critical classes that you need for medical school. So I applied to medical school at kind of the end of that period. And my first go round, I didn't get accepted. And I had majored in religious studies at that time because I'm like, well, that's easy. They told me, you know, you can kind of major in whatever you want to major in. no one really told me you should major in something that you might need to get a job in, or what if this med school thing doesn't work out? And so I basically had a degree in something that I couldn't use, and I wasn't able to do what my whole life, I thought I was going to do. So I ended up going back home. I worked odd jobs that you didn't need really do with a high school diploma, and then sort of refocused and thought, okay, well, if I can't be a doctor, I'll be a social worker, because part of my vision was to build communities and offer healthcare and social services and recreation. The recreation piece was way back there too, because that was kind of the holistic experience I had growing up. So anyway, fast forward, I went to a graduate program, took, higher level courses to prove myself. And then in the course of that, I met a man that I married. He was a part of a ministry, and I was a new believer, so to speak. And his parents were pastors, and my parents were divorced, and they were kind of an intact family. And I thought, wow, these people are really spiritual, and they know more than me about the Lord. So I kind of became discipled, in a sense, by this family. And I got married. People in my life told me it was a bad decision. They were like, why would you get married? You've only known him a year. Aren't you going to medical school? And I'm like, oh, you guys don't understand. This is the Lord. He's from a holy family. His family's pastors and all of this. And so in fact, I had people on the street, literally on the street, coming up to me going, oh, hi, how are you doing? Whatever. In the conversation, I'm getting married. Why are you doing that? And I'm thinking, you don't know anything about me. Like, you're just like a stranger. And so anyway, it turned out to be not a good decision. So I did get married, and then I reapplied to med school in the course of that. And my husband and his family did not want me to go. I was pregnant with my son at that time. And they were saying, well, you're pursuing kind of your secular dream, and you're breaking up the home, and this is out of God's order. And so I wrote a letter to the med school that I got accepted to, and said, you know what, I'm going to make the right decision for my family, keep my home together, and not go to med school, and fulfill this dream I've had since I was a child. And so the school offered me a full scholarship at that time. I wrote the letter, I sent the letter. The dean of the school called me on the phone and said, are you crazy? I'm going to rip up this letter right now and pretend like I never saw it. And so I went with it. I'm like, nope, I need to do this. I felt like it was God's call for me in that moment. And so I didn't go. And so I stayed in the marriage. I became very, very, very bitter at my husband and his parents during that period. And I became very upset with God, because I thought I was following him, and he was stealing a dream that had already been lost once. This is now the second time. And so I just kind of stopped going to church, didn't really want to do much. I was working odd jobs at that point. I was even like a janitor in a restaurant at one point. And I'm thinking, God, you've got to be kidding me, right? Like, this is what I've given up for you. And I'm sweeping floors in a restaurant. And so I became very depressed. I attempted
Which is a beautiful thing,
Depression.
Oh, that is a beautiful thing, to sweep floors in a restaurant. I want the floors clean when I go to a restaurant, right?
Yeah, I do it now too. I do it now too. But it wasn't being a doctor, and it wasn't what I had gone to school for, and it was kind of like,
right.
So anyway, still being married to my then husband, we came across a church, like we were watching the NBA finals somewhere, and the commercial comes on for a church in the middle of the NBA finals, and I'm like, oh, this is unusual, and it was a church that I ended up going to. The people looked I mean, I thought like nice people, so we went there. And that was probably my first turning point, I'll say. When we were in that church, we heard about the goodness of God and how God was not trying to ruin your life. And I suppose I had heard that before, but I didn't feel the love of God the way I had felt in that place. And so I started to heal. You know, I did a lot of repenting for my choices and my mistakes, and really just asking God for a cleansing and just a new walk. In the course of this, like we were living with my husband's parents at the time. Like we filed bankruptcy, like we had no money, we had like bad credit, like we were, you know, it was hellish. And so from what I thought my life would have. And so anyway, so in the course of that, I sort of recovered my perspective on who God was and just started trusting him kind of to be a dad more. And then he led me into a job at Johns Hopkins University as an administrative assistant. And those people ended up paying for me to go to grad school, writing my letters for med school, and kind of, I divorced my husband in the course of that, but I was getting my life back, you know, kind of the things that I had dreamed about were happening. So I did get into the same medical school that initially offered me a full ride, and this time they didn't. I paid a lot of money, but it's okay, you know, and I started medical school when my son started kindergarten. So I had my mom's help. I moved back home and could not have done it, obviously, without her, and went through med school with, you know, lots of prayers, lots of help with my son. And then after med school, I didn't get accepted in the residency that I wanted. So I ended up staying at that school doing an internship for one extra year and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And during that year, I met a group of friends. One of those people is Barry Wright, who's like a big part of my current story. And, you know, we just became friends. We hung out, we vacationed together, whatever. And then we all kind of went our separate ways and went to residency and training. So when it was time to get a job, I did not see myself living in Michiana, Indiana. I had never heard of it. I wanted to go to Virginia, back home. And this was kind of the first time I saw God sort of directing traffic, and I was open to him directing traffic. And so the place I prayed, I was like, Lord, I want to go where you want me to go. And there was a hospital I really wanted to go to. And I remember I was in the locker room one day at this hospital, and the person who was supposed to be interviewing me was like, hey, do not come here. This is a terrible place. And I was like, oh, I know the hand of God now. When I see a stranger warning me, don't do something, then I kind of, so those doors were closed. I said no to that job, and that was a job I really wanted. And Indiana seemed like a good idea. It was like the practice seemed like a good practice. I had a church. I found a church here. That's another amazing story. I was planning to not go to church that Sunday, and I typed in Mishawaka Japanese Gardens, which I wanted to. I was like, I won't go to church. I'll go to a place. And it took me to Christian Life Center. Like my GPS took me there. And there was someone standing outside saying, hey, we're having church. Why don't you come back? And I was like, okay. So I went back that day and instantly felt the love of God and the presence of God there. And I was like, oh, okay, God, I think you're telling me I can live here.
For sure.
Now, mind you, I'm a single mom at this time. I don't have any family in this place and that I knew of. But when I came back from my scouting trip, I discovered that one of my good friends from that period, those 8-year friendships, one of those people lived about a mile down the road from where I was looking to live. So God planted an instant friend. I had a church, and so I'm like, okay, God, this seems a little unusual. People thought it was crazy. They were like, okay, well, first of all, you're a Black woman. You're moving to do you know what plan is there? And I'm like, I feel like it's okay. So I've never even seen the plan. But so I did, and I felt like it was spirit led. So coming out here, I felt like I had a closer walk with God because he, you know, I was journaling and we were talking and communicating. And a few years ago, I remembered one of my other childhood dreams, which was the recreation center. And I journaled it. I made a little prayer request in my journal. I was like, Lord, you know, make me an entrepreneur. I want to bring this thing to life. And I kind of forgot about it. So then fast forward maybe a year, I was in church and I was really kind of dedicating my life anew to the Lord and like wanting what he wanted, like really wanting that, not just giving him my list and saying, could you please make this up to me? And so I had this vision during that worship service, and it was, I believe it was the hand of Christ kind of saying, follow me. And I said, okay, I'll follow you. And I thought I was gonna like be called to Africa or like, you know, the missions field or something. And like later that day, I was at the skating rink here in town, and they announced that they were closing. And so I, you know, something rose up and said, you can't let them close. Like, we need stuff for family. So I went to talk to the manager and then the owner, and then he and I became very good friends. And he started mentoring me and sending me to conferences and teaching me about the business. And I knew God was doing something like really unusual, right? Because I had like no experience in family entertainment center industry, like never done anything like this. And I only told like 4 people because I felt like God had spoken to me, the Joshua and Caleb word, like, I'm going to take you here, but it's going to look unusual, and you need to watch your mouth, and you need to be with people of faith. So I told Barry, right, that I mentioned earlier, and my other friends too, and they were kind of like, yeah, that sounds great. You're gonna buy a skating rink, sure, you know. And Barry prayed about it. He was like, I mean, he didn't tell me he did that at the time. He was just like very supportive and everything. But he prayed about it, and he said, well, God said yes. And I was like, okay. And so he pretty much invested. I mean, like, his walk of faith is like, I was here looking at land and I was doing all this. He was in another state, and he was like, he just basically put all of his assets in the pool on the line for this. And because he heard from God. And so wow. We started scouting, and the USA deal didn't work out. But we knew that God was in it. So we were like, we don't know what's happening, but we know we have all these helpers and all of these resources. So we're going to find another place. And so we found the land that we're on right now through a series of miracles. Like, the seller was sort of like, oh yeah, we like you guys, we'll sell it to you at a good price. And it was like a $200,000 purchase, and I had maybe $1,000 in the bank at the time we were going through this. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess we'll just play it out. And God sent the money when the time was right. And so we were able to buy the land with cash. And then God sent the right banker and all of that. And we closed on our loan in February of 2020, right before banks start shutting down everything. We had a builder who saw the vision too. He was kind of committed to this, and he's like, well, if you guys are going to get open by fall, we need to break ground in November of 2019. We didn't even have our money from the bank yet. And so the builder, he was like, well, if we're going to be open, I'm going to do it. And I wasn't even in town. I came back to town, and they've broken ground. I was like, we don't have any money yet. But he did, because he believed that we were going to fight this winter, and, you know, we were going to have a bad winter. And then, you know, all of the forecasts, and we're in a meeting, and we're like, you know what? This is God's timing, right? So the money's not here yet, but we believe it's God's timing. So we started declaring like crazy people that this is going to be the warmest winter South Bend has ever seen. We're going to pour concrete and all of this. And so I have the newspaper article. It's the second warmest winter in South Bend's history. And my builder was pouring concrete in January. like with no,
right.
no freezing, anti-freezing stuff. And it's just been one thing after the other. Like axe throwing, we have axe throwing, we have bowling, we have laser tag, we have a restaurant, we have, an arcade, and now we have drop tower. And so we didn't have axe throwing before. I really wanted it, but I never really said anything. My builder is like, hey, axe throwing sounds good. We have spaceport here. And so we didn't have money for like the materials and like the wood and all of this. And so he says, well, I think I have some wood at my house. And so he goes to his house and he has the exact amount of wood, beautiful, that we need to build it out completely. We didn't get a single, it was like, I just felt this is how that really. So, and it was like, and there are so many other little things like that, like God controlling the weather, God providing the resources. We were delayed in opening. We were supposed to open in January. No, when were we supposed to open?
Oh, June, right? Wasn't it June? When it was delayed
June,
for COVID?
I think it was June. And we opened October 8th or October 6th. And so, but we were stressed out about the opening and all. And because, we had saved up money for payroll to get us through like a certain period. And we were like running out of money. And we're like, well, we're not open yet. And it's a pandemic. What are we going to do? And so we opened like, I think a week after the restrictions were lifted for COVID. And it was like, oh, thank you, Lord. Like if we had opened sooner, we wouldn't even have had time to like fine tune and learn from all these other businesses that have done it, And so we were like, we had kind of the best practices were in place. We knew kind of how businesses were coping with it. And then when we opened, we didn't have any restrictions other than like we decided we're going to do 50% just because we have a really big building. And we're like, we can keep people far apart, and just keep our numbers down.
Right.
Like, and so, and we had funding, we had money to sustain ourselves. So it wasn't like we needed like people to come in and, keep the doors open. And God is like, even sustaining us, we call it blooming in the desert. Like we're blooming in the desert, like we're profitable and we're profitable, like in this environment.
And that's crazy. Brand new COVID and crazy.
Yeah. So, and I tell people, it wasn't, both Barry and I, we lost our moms in this process. So we had, again, the questioning moments like, God, what are you doing? Like you're giving us this fun business, but you're taking our parents, and it was, again, the wrestling with God, like, and then understanding that like biblically, Christianity is not a cakewalk. Like the people in the Bible had tribulations and trials, and like learning to understand that this world is not our home. Like we look to heaven, and we have to be more kingdom minded than all of the little things that we've set our eyes on that cause us so much stress and strain. And so recently, over the last couple of months, I've just learned that to be more kingdom minded, that this stuff is all a blessing, but it really is just stuff, and my mom, his mom are in our future. Like they're in God's arms. Like that's a wonderful thing to celebrate. I wouldn't want either of them in this world, even if I could have them back right now. So I'm like, it's just kind of a perspective change on more, less kind of the earthly stuff. Even though it's great, it's a blessing, but it's like, what's the real purpose in all of this? And it's sort of not what it looks like. Yeah. So that's a super long version of this.
Very cool. Very cool. So I do want to ask you, I heard you talk about journaling, especially in the times when you first were moving to Mishawaka. We love to ask, how do you stay inspired every day? What is it that you do to stay connected, to hear God's voice and know that it's him and not Theresa's voice, right? So what is it that you do? Because it's different for everybody. Everybody connects a different way. but some are going to connect more like you do, and some are going to connect more like I do, and some are going to connect more like somebody else does.
Yeah.
So how do you stay in touch and in tune and inspired?
So as I mentioned, journaling is a big thing. I recently started, I pray in the spirit, we pray in tongues, and that's sort of kind of a refocus to align more vertically with God and take my mental part of it out of the picture. But like becoming more diligent about what the Word of God says has been probably a bigger change for me, and not just accepting my idea of events as the way it is. Like understanding God's word is the ultimate truth. And if I have anxiety, for instance, which, in a pandemic, right, I'm like, okay, I'm anxious. I'm like, okay, wait, I have to like speak to myself verbally and say, God is not giving me this spirit of fear. He's given me power, love, and a sound mind. And I have the mind of Christ. God supplies all my needs. Like speaking out the word just over my thoughts has been really helpful in those moments where it's kind of like, you feel overwhelmed, by circumstances. And then
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, Theresa, thank you for sharing. I'm so grateful to put your story out there. And if one person hears about, dreams and, I want to do this, and you don't really follow God, so it's awesome. Just one person hears your story. It's great. If you guys know somebody that needs to hear Theresa's story, do share it with them. If you guys go and meet Theresa at Generations. I don't know how often you're there at the park. What's the title of it? Generations
AdventurePlex. So yeah, weeknights we open at 4.
AdventurePlex.
Yeah. And I'm usually, I'm here more than, I'm here a lot.
Yep. So if you want to hook up with Theresa and ask her questions about her faith or whatever, we'll connect you. You can message us here if you're watching from YouTube or Facebook. Just message right there. If you're watching from lifeinspiredshow.com, you can find a way to email us from there, because there's a way to email us from there, so you can do that, and we will hook you up with Miss Theresa, Dr. Theresa, and if you know somebody that needs to tell their story, we would love that too. You can message us for that. So thank you, Theresa, for sharing. Appreciate it. And thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like. We appreciate it. Have a great week. Bye-bye.